Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L, and today I've got a general anime video for ya. So quick intro, I think 2 months ago I was playing Fire Emblem Three Houses on stream, and there was this moment where a character did something pretty slick. The character shot an arrow into the air and had it fall at just the right time, at just the right place, and my reaction to that was, well, that's so anime, and it got me thinking. This combat trick has happened a bit. In 2019, for instance, we had 2 examples of this technique that anime characters used in order to gain some kind of advantage. So, in this video, we'll look at 3 examples of this absolutely genius strategy that anime characters use, and we'll compare how well it works across the 3 sample anime and see how they put their own spin to the same trick. The 3 samples being Dr. Stone, My Hero Academia, and Kimetsu No Yaiba. So first things first, let's detail the trick. The premise of the trick is pretty basic. You have the enemy and the thrower in battle. The thrower gets an object into the air. At this step, we get the first split in the technique that gives rise to 2 primary variations. It all revolves around whether the enemy notices the initial throw. If the enemy doesn't notice the initial throw, it means the thrower is the distraction and the airborne object is the finisher. In this variation, the thrower is doing all they can to make sure the enemy is more or less in the object's trajectory, while also making sure that the enemy doesn't notice the oncoming death. This is the variation that we see in My Hero Academia and Kimetsu. The second variation happens when the enemy is aware of the object. In this variation, the object is the distraction, while the thrower tries to do something below to gain an edge in the fight. This is the variation observed in Dr. Stone. From these 2 variations, there's a few more wrinkles that a writer could add in order to make the trick a bit more interesting, such as playing with the numbers on the thrower's side. Fire Emblem Three Houses and Dr. Stone did this, for instance. So those are the variations. Let's jump into the specifics. The scenes we're going to be looking at are the scenes in the montage at the beginning of the video. They are Dr. Stone's Tsukasa vs Taiju and Yuzuriha, My Hero Academia's Bakugo vs Ochako, and Kimetsu no Yaiba's Tanjiro vs Giyu. The first thing I want to cover is the physics or the physicality of the situation. Now in anime, anything is possible. After all,
imagination.
It gets an artistic license to screw with physics, and that's okay. If you need it to work, it'll work. But when it comes to this trick, sometimes it's kind of weird to draw this. And I just want to talk about that aspect of the weirdness. In this case, I find the Fire Emblem Three Houses example that inspired this video and the Kimetsu no Yaiba example the best at demonstrating how wonky this can be to depict for different reasons. The Fire Emblem Three Houses one, and I'll keep this as spoiler free as I can, had a person engaging in sword-on-sword combat with the arrow landing right on the enemy's arm. The arrow was fired before that bit of combat started though, so what it meant was either the archer was a super genius or the swordsman forced the enemy into just the right spot at just the right time while keeping an eye on the arrow. That's cool and all, but when you see the scene, it's like there's no way. Buddy guy didn't even look up. In this case, the message would be that the archer and the swordsman were so in sync that they just knew. And that's fine, because the 2 characters being close was a plot point. But this is definitely requiring a suspension of disbelief. Anyway, in Fire Emblem, the thing that's weird is just the crazy precision and the foresight that was required. I mean, 1 step too far and the swordsman ends up with an arrow through the skull. For Kimetsu, the weirdness for me comes from the timing of the scene and how it plays out. Here, I'm gonna show you what I mean. Tanjiro, the thrower, throws the hatchet into the air. He then has time to travel the distance that the hatchet will also travel in order to reach the enemy Giyu. And then there's time for Giyu to hit Tanjiro, and time for Tanjiro to fall onto the ground, and then time for Nezuko to react and make sounds while Giyu has time to observe Tanjiro and wonder about the place of the hatchet. Not only that, the angle that the hatchet needs to leave the tree from also seems kinda weird, but that might just be weird perspective. And for the record for this one, I'm totally willing to accept that Tanjiro could throw with perfect accuracy. The weirdness for me just comes from the behavior of the thrown axe, and specifically its falling behavior. See, the axe has to be in the air for 18 seconds if we're being thorough, or 8 seconds if we're being nice. Is it possible? Yeah, it totally is. All it requires is that Tanjiro throw the hatchet high enough to make it so that it's in the air for long enough for all the other things to happen. Can he physically do that? Yes, obviously, it's anime. It would be ridiculous to draw the line here. Heck, Taiju and Dr. Stone threw a boulder half his size. The problem here isn't whether or not these characters can throw the objects at the speeds that are required. It's really the behavior of the object once it's falling. And here is where Kimetsu's depiction of this breaks, ironically because of the anime's attention to detail. We end up getting a continuous shot where we see the axe fall on Giyu. This is what breaks the physics. When you compare the still shots of the axe across the same points in the revolution, you can see that the axe is still gaining vertical altitude. This is the problem. Next, we see the axe fall, and that fall takes 4 seconds for it to reach the point that it was launched from, roughly. Here's the thing. The time taken to go up is the time taken to come down when you have a non-changing object and you ignore air resistance. And you can see that behavior from the basic time of flight formula. And just so you know, that too there accounts for the time it takes for an object to rise and the time it takes for the object to return to the point it was at. Honestly, the time of flight formula is pretty cool. There's a lot of simulators on the internet. I highly recommend playing around with it if you want to see how it works. Anyway, if you take into account air resistance, and this is broad strokes, then the hatchet could take longer coming down depending on terminal velocity. Which doesn't help us since it means the rising time was even shorter than 4 seconds. And you might be asking, why do we know that the time before the hatchet starts descending was longer than 4 seconds? Well, that's where I got the 18 seconds from. I timed the scenes. I measured time by carefully splitting the scenes and reducing overlaps. According to my timing of Tanjiro, he reached Giyu in around 3 seconds, and then the axe landed like 15 seconds later, implying that the axe had 18 seconds of airtime at least. And for those 15 seconds, I tried to be fair here, and didn't include the slowdown scenes, and assumed that Nezuko had her moment at the same time as Giyu was observing Tanjiro. And just so you understand how quickly things can get away from us, it takes Giyu a second to call Tanjiro a fool, and another second for him to complete the smackdown, and for Tanjiro to fall, while ignoring the slow-mo period, and then it takes Giyu another 3 seconds to drop his guard and wonder about the hatchet before looking up. Right there, we have 5 seconds accounted for, plus the 3 seconds taken on the approach, giving us 8 seconds before we even see the hatchet falling. Point is, the physical behavior is broken. The reality is, this is just the problem that comes with working with anime, i.e. the type of show where people just love talking and reacting. They are going to take up time. In the manga, the passage of time is vague enough to help the suspension of disbelief, but the anime was screwed if they were going to try to show this well enough with all the dialogue they had to fit in. The moment that a character talks, there's a measurable passage of time, and the longer it goes, the more screwy the physics ends up getting. So the point is, if you were a kinematics buff, you would have seen this scene and you would have been weirded out before eventually just saying, oh, anime, it's gonna happen. What I really want you to take away from this though is that this trick is hard to depict in motion. So it's one of those things you just have to go with. And I'm sure this wonkiness is also present in Dr. Stone's example if you were to scrutinize it. But for now, let's continue to the other 2 series. Those series did some funny things with the physicality of the situation. In Dr. Stone, they took advantage of characters openly being near superhuman, having resident strongman Taiju lob a boulder. The boulder is obviously heavy, but Dr. Stone has a pretty strong excuse in that it's Taiju. Of course he could do this. Of course it works, because Taiju having superhuman strength was a given at this point. What's funny here is that accuracy didn't matter, because Dr. Stone had a young lady take advantage of the distraction and dump gunpowder on the enemy, creating a situation where all that mattered was the boulder landing. Right there, Dr. Stone removed one of the aspects that required some suspension of disbelief, that is, the perfect accuracy required. In My Hero Academia, the physicality of it was totally invalidated with the thrower, Ochako, just having a power that nullifies acceleration due to gravity, i.e. the single quantity that makes this trick hard to depict. If you ignore gravity, then whatever, who cares, just yeah, good to go. So when it comes to physicality, you get Kimetsu, who plays it straight and really just requires the possible superhuman to have superhuman coordination and arm strength. Which, in Kimetsu, fair to assume it's there. I mean, Tanjiro has superhuman smell from the get-go, so it's like, yeah, okay, that's not that hard to put stock in. Dr. Stone also requires superhuman strength, but that's already accepted and blatantly advertised. Dr. Stone also made it easier to swallow by removing the accuracy needed. And then Hero Academia just says screw it to the rules and only applied acceleration to the gravity when Ochako needed it. So, all very different cases of how these different shows handle the physicality of the situation. But that's the physicality. Now let's look at the purpose of the trick, because sure enough, the trick did something important for the respective stories. So in other words, we're asking, how did the trick influence the story? In Hero Academia's case, the trick has the least impact on the story of the three examples. Instead, it has more impact on how people view the thrower, Ochako. In Hero Academia, Ochako was just up against someone who just had a more direct combat type ability. So what this trick did for her was that it showed her resourcefulness, her ingenuity, and her determination. Her plan was simple: have her opponent kick up dust and debris, use her power to get the debris airborne without the enemy noticing, and then waiting for the right moment to drop it all on him. For Hero Academia's Ochako, the trick proved that this girl was a worthy opponent who could think and strategize while under pressure. But unfortunately, when she dropped the payload, well, people just aren't born equal in the Hero Academia world. And that's ultimately why this trick has the weakest impact among the three examples. It did a lot for the character, but that's it. It was the tool by which the character expressed her natural abilities. And in terms of long-lasting effects, it just told people who saw it to not underestimate the girl. Not only that, but because this occurred in a friendly tournament, there aren't any long-lasting story ramifications to the plot. So, like I said, not much story impact, but very impactful for the characters and the readers. Moving into Dr. Stone's example, the trick was used in a pivotal moment in the story. If it didn't work here, the team was hooped. The implementation of this one also tied into one of the central themes of Dr. Stone, that is, science is the great equalizer that puts people on an even playing field. In Dr. Stone, the enemy had just downed the thrower's friend. The thrower, Taiju, wants to secure the friend's body and run, so he throws the boulder. The boulder is ultimately a distraction, and the enemy Tsukasa thinks it's a distraction, but he also has to try and keep an eye on the boulder and on Taiju. Now here's where things get messy in Dr. Stone's implementation. Dr. Stone took an advantage of a bias that the enemy had. That is, that women are weak. The thrower, Taiju, had another friend present at this time. That was the young lady Yuzuriha. With the enemy distracted between the boulder and the thrower, the character Yuzuriha ran towards the gunpowder that the group had and tossed it towards the enemy. It was portrayed as the ultimate team move between the three friends. It played with the theme that the enemy embodied and exploited it. This one moment was ultimately conflict between living in a world full of science versus living in one without. And it reinforced a prominent theme in Dr. Stone, that being that science allows everyone to play on more or less the same terms. Also, since the trick worked, it gave the group the time they needed to take their dead friend, which ultimately affected the course of the story. If it wasn't for that boulder, things might have ended here abruptly. This is why this moment has quite severe story impact. Now finally, Kimetsu's moment is both a strong character proving moment and a strong story moment. So the premise here is that the thrower's sister, Nezuko, is about to be slashed. For a long time before, the thrower Tanjiro spent time begging, which caused the enemy, Giyu, to give him a verbal lashing while on the inside being apologetic for what was about to occur and then urging the boy to keep going. Now I'm not going to recap what Tanjiro did, but Tanjiro goes in and does his best to distract Giyu so that even if he falls, the axe will land on Giyu's head. What Tanjiro does when he pulls off his trick is that he shows his determination and physical abilities to Giyu. What ultimately happened was that this final display was enough to merely distract or shake Giyu, which allowed for Giyu the opportunity to see something that he had never seen before. So this one is interesting because it used the trick as something to impress the enemy enough to allow something else unprecedented to happen. The trick ultimately allows a window of opportunity. Regardless, this was enough to prove to Giyu that Tanjiro and his sister were worthwhile, which is where we go to story impact. If Tanjiro didn't go this far, Giyu would have executed his sister Nezuko, and he would have been on his way while praying that Tanjiro recovered well. So without this trick, Giyu would not have been impressed with the boy enough to give him pause, and in losing that pause would have lost his opportunity to see what Nezuko was capable of. Anyway, all in all, here you had 2 examples that allow the story to continue in Dr. Stone and Kimetsu, and 2 examples where the trick shows a character's worth and abilities, the examples for that one being Hero Academia and Kimetsu. 2 of the examples also made use of characters being really sneaky with getting their objects into the air, that being My Hero Academia and Kimetsu, and in all 3 examples you require some degree of superhuman abilities. Although that determination is clearer in Dr. Stone and My Hero Academia, and is more subjective for Kimetsu no Yaiba, with the special note here being that the anime is the one that has to be really looked at, because the way that the time is spent is the thing that makes the anime seem more improbable. All that said, it's really cool to see how different people execute on a similar idea, that being throwing something into the air and hoping for a win. So I gotta ask you guys now, who do you think had the best depiction? For me, hard to say. They all have their strengths, right? It's all about seeing how different people put their own spin on the same kind of idea. I am partial, though, to Hero Academia for just removing gravity altogether until it was important, because that's just like, yeah, that's funny. But yeah, all 3 examples utilized the trick well and took it seriously enough. And you know, what more could you really want? Anyway, that's it for me. Oh my gosh, 12 hours, but done. Oh, wow. Glad I made it. And hey, if you made it, man, leave a like. Let me know that this was worthwhile. Give meaning to my 12 hours. But yeah, no, man, it was an interesting video. It was pretty fun. Worked on it over 3 days. I also edited a lot out, and I also did calculations for what kind of speeds Tanjiro needs to hit if he wanted to be able to keep that axe in the air for long enough, and I calculated those for 8 seconds and 18 seconds. So if you want to know what speeds we were talking about here, please let me know in the comments down below, and I'll pin a comment up. I'll let you know that I've posted the calculations. We're done. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.